everybody. I am far more used to being behind a keyboard and writing than I am standing in front of people talking. So I was going to actually knock the nerves out of myself by singing a song for you, first of all. So, have you heard of Phil the flute? They're from the town of Ballymuck. Times were going hard on him, in fact the man was broke, so we sent out a notice to his neighbours one and all, as how he'd like their company that evening at a ball. And when writing out he was careful to suggest to them that if they found a hat of his convenient at the door, the more they put in whenever he requested them, the better would the music be for battering the floor, with a toot on the flute and a tiddle on the fiddle, hopping on the heron like a heron on the griddle, up, down, hands around, crossing to the wall. Hadn't we the gaiety, it filled the fluter's ball. I reckon that might get me going now, all right. But the reason I kind of know that song and sang it in probably too high a register there, but was when I was growing up, I came from the kind of family that would listen to Percy French, and of course the Dubliners did loads of versions of Percy French's songs, and it's just one of those ordinary families that listen to his kind of music and don't have any snobbery and are able to have that cultural appreciation and the political awareness to know what was behind Percy French, and instead of perhaps maybe going for more sort of elite activities, that's the kind of thing that we did at home. And I was thinking of the kind of people who also appreciate Percy French and how they need to be visible in media, and particularly in press, where I've worked for the past 25 years. So I came into press in the mid-1990s when I was 19 years old, and it was a very different place even then as to what it is now. But I feel like as if at that time that we would have had that visibility there of sort of the working people, the ordinary person's voice, and they would have been treated with respect and dignity and things like that. They weren't just sort of shoved it off to, you can read the tabloids because that's your level. They were included in all the newspapers of the day, be it the press or the Irish Times even, who've been mentioned an awful lot today already. But I think what has been happening since then is, that less and less that they've seen that visibility, or that. Like, while a paper should be like a mirror, reflecting the people in the way that my own paper is called The Mirror, for that very reason, it should reflect all that is before it, and it should be for all the people. I find that as the time has gone on, in my time in journalism, certainly it is kind of doing that less and less and less. So, for example, one of the last times I was in the Northwest, which is, as I always say, not just a geography, but a place of mind, a state of mind. As far as I'm concerned, it's a very critical thinking place to be, sufficiently far away from the Dublin bubble. But one of the last times I was up there, I was at a funeral in Manorhamilton, and I bumped into an old teacher of mine who was a fantastic thinker and a great historian, really interested in life and people and cultural politics, everything like that. And he said to me, "Larissa, can you tell me something? I used to love," and I'm sorry, the Irish Times is terrible. It's like we'll never get sponsorship here. He said, "I used to love the Irish Times, and I used to love getting it, and I'd have a great read of it." And he said, "It just doesn't speak to me anymore. I don't see myself anymore in the Irish Times. I don't know what they're talking about half the time. None of the issues are important to me anymore." So he was like, we were kind of joking about it. He was saying it's all things like these sort of modern, made-up moral panics. What's happening now? Some TD asked a woman who was going for a job with him whether she had children or not. He's the worst person in the world, all over the front pages. Or you might have a big round of applause for some TD with a double-barreled name who'd brought in professorships for female professors only, and everyone's going, "Oh, that's wonderful." But actually, people like my teacher, Mr. McCarristine, was saying, "What's this got to do with my everyday life? And where's my daily challenges, or the daily challenges that we're hearing about from that we experience every day? Well, where are they in the paper? because the paper only has a certain amount of room. So if you're filling them up with all these issues that only affect maybe people who are already privileged or have nothing else really to think about, then by definition, you're going to actually sacrifice important focus on important issues. That is exactly what has happened. But so, you know, I was trying to explain to him to maybe to maybe sum it up why this has happened. And I'm sure that you've all probably noticed this yourselves as well. But why this has happened really is a combination of two things at its essence. Now, a lot of other things coming in around it. But it is essentially two reasons. One of them is the universification, as I've made up that word, but the universification of journalism, where it has gone from being a trade, a kind of a hard-working, get your hands dirty trade, into being sort of exalted into sort of an elite profession by adding a degree onto, you know, there's a degree in this thing, so suddenly you're a part of what Samuel Taylor Coleridge called the clerisy. I don't know if you've heard of that phrase before, but it's sort of a group of learned thinkers who tell us all essentially what to think and how to think. So there's two reasons. So and I'll talk about this over the next 20 minutes of this talk. I'll explain how this has all worked out. But it's the universification of journalism is one reason. Again, in a minute, I'll explain to you why I think this is actually a bad thing. There are certain things where knowing too much, certain jobs where being overeducated can be almost more of a hindrance than being almost undereducated. And in my view, journalism is one of them. It's a common sense trade. It's not something that you can learn from years in journalism. But the second key thing, again, I'll go into this now in more detail. Second key thing is social media and the effects, particularly in the last 10 years, that social media has had on, I would say, sort of a paralysing and a word that Dr. Casey used earlier on, a self-censoring effect on journalists themselves and also their editors, who always want those ABC One readers and want to keep the advertisers as well that they bring in. So it's what we have as a result of this. I suppose the reason I find this so bad is not just that it reflects terribly on the trade that I chose as a person who believed who genuinely believed in social justice in its purest form, but it's also it's undermining democracy. So when you have a press that only reflects some of the people, you're not getting the full picture of the whole nation that they're supposed to represent. You're only getting a press that reflects, at the moment, kind of each other. Sort of, it's a sort of a bubble where it's written by a certain group of people for a certain group of people. And as a result of that, you've kind of got an abandonment, I suppose, of what you would call the working class, but really just the ordinary person. So, I want to see my trade and my profession as it is now, or the work that we do in the press. I want to see it do the function that it is supposed to do, which is, it's supposed to kind of raise all people and raise issues that are important to all those people, instead of going down some sort of crazy route, talking about, incessantly that we see lately, things like the National Maternity Hospital. Should the nuns run it or not? And I feel like for a lot of people these aren't generally issues that affect their everyday lives. But I'm wondering, has other people noticed, just in general, the feeling at the moment in newspapers is that we have sort of the same kind of uniform voices. You're hearing sort of this kind of conformist. Everyone's a conformist in newspapers now at the moment, and you don't very much hear. There's a sort of a set of liberal I would say, identity politics talking points. And there's nobody really goes outside, or very, very few at this stage, goes outside of those agreed views. And I'm just wondering, in general, have other people noticed that in the media in the last couple of years, and particularly so in the last, I would say, 10 years, as Twitter has taken hold, and then it has ramped up into cancel culture and all these kind of things. So, I mean, for me, I find that at one stage, you know, there's probably, if I can, like, to make this about me, I'm sorry to be bringing it back, but I was probably one of the only very, very few people within media who was willing to actually talk outside what was the agreed orthodoxy. You know, like, I think maybe part of the reason why I was willing to do that was because first of all, because I was a woman. If you're a man now in media, you might as well just, you know, commit professional suicide to bring up any kind of disagreement on areas of you know, sexism or feminism, or, you know, of the usual isms. Anything like that could end up costing you your job. So a lot of people just don't bother at all. And I feel that possibly the reason that I wasn't like that was because, back to the university and the social media thing, A, I didn't go to university, and B, I'm not on social media. So, and C, I'm a woman, so I get away with an awful lot more now these days, in the days of cancel culture, than other people do. But it's like, what I would say about the issue with the university, if I could maybe come to that first of all, the issue with the university situation is that journalism, by its absolute nature, is a trade, and it should never be turned into an academic pursuit. And there's absolutely no reason, or in fact, I would say it's probably harmful to go off and study it for 4 years, because, you know, like, it's a bit like being a carpenter and saying, you know, here's how you learn. Here's the science of how you make I don't know, a cabinet or a table or something like that, and going off and learning that for 4 years, and then if you come out, no matter how much you've learned, you're never going to be just able to make the table. So it's a practical, common sense pursuit or set of learning that is uniquely suitable, I would say, personally, to apprenticeships and trainee situations, and not actually sitting in a university lecture hall for 4 years, wasting 4 years of your time, when you could. I always say to people, you know, what do they do for the other 3 years and 11 months? Because, to be honest, I could teach them in 1 month what more than you could learn in 4 years in university of journalism. But you have these people who are coming out after wasting the 4 years, and then they, to be quite honest with you, the caliber that I have seen is brutal. They're literally coming out not knowing a single thing. What we do in journalism is, the whole purpose of it is to establish fact from fiction, and to challenge what you might want to think about something against the actual truth of the situation. And it involves skills around fact-checking, accuracy. It involves, so it's all very, very practical thing to do. It involves knocking on doors, and, you know, so for example, no matter how long you were in a university for, you won't know how to knock on someone's door if somebody has just had, say, a serious grief in the family, or how to get somebody to trust you to talk to them. These aren't things that you can learn in a lecture hall. But I feel personally that this is causing a sort of, we're now in journalism, for all our talk about progressiveness and inclusivity, and for all our talk about diversity and so on that we get lectured about, actually within journalism we've a very homogenous group, and it is completely excluding of people who haven't gone to do that degree. So, for example, in America, 92% of journalists have degrees, which is compared to the general public, about a third of them have degrees. In Ireland, it's 80% university educated, and in the UK, it's about the same. So you'd probably be thinking, well, what's so wrong about going to university for journalism? But the issue, I suppose, comes back to the universities themselves, which are the ideology is it's so uniform that actually the social sorry, just find his name here. Sorry, I'm just looking through stuff here. The social academic Joel Kotkin has said that it's like an ideological re-education camp. So you're talking about things like 70-1 liberal in universities, and you're talking about things like, for example, I think in the US only 7% of academics regard themselves as Republicans. So what you have there is you have not only just the one ideological viewpoint, but then you also have just the one kind of person who's coming into university. I mean, I don't think that someone like me would exist anymore in journalism today, because there's something, I suppose, that maybe not a lot of people would know even about here in Ireland, is that if you want to become a journalist, one of the major things is you have to get that experience that I was saying, that knocking on the door, that learning how to talk to somebody who's had a tragedy, that empathy or that listening approach to be able to get somebody to talk to you. Sorry, I just had a blank moment there for 1 second. Hang on, I'm sorry, I'm very nervous, everybody. Can I just hold on a minute? I just got really nervous, I'm sorry. I'm really not used to talking in public, and I've completely just got a blank. But I suppose, yeah, I'll just try and talk away anyway and see how we get on. Maybe I'll just get a glass of water there in a minute. Paddy might be able to give me one. Oh, it's there behind me, yeah. So I suppose what I'm saying is, yes, I bring myself back now. I've just kind of calmed down a little bit there. I just got a bit panicky. At the moment, if you want to get into journalism, what you have to do is you have to be university educated. We have a situation now which is not just terribly unfair but farcical, that you can't really progress in journalism in Ireland unless you actually have a university degree, because they have setups now. Whereas, again, if I go back to myself, it might be the easiest. When I came in when I was 19, I was able to work my way up through the local newspapers. And the local newspapers you give you your start, you'd get a few stories, and then you'd come in the door, and you would learn, you would be able to say, in my case, the Sunday World, I have these few stories, I've shown an initiative, and then they let you in and they train you. But now what has to happen is, in order to get that training in newspapers, you have to be signed up to a university. Most of the newspapers are connected to universities. So DCU, for example, will have an agreement with the Sunday Times. I'm only making this up now. I'm not quite sure about who has the connection with who, but we'll say DIT has an agreement with the Irish Independent, and they take university graduates only. So the person who, for example, like myself, who came from a council estate, and who couldn't afford to go to university, to be quite frank about it, we didn't have the space where you could go off for 4 years and not earn money. Someone like me would never have gotten into journalism today. I can't see it happening. I don't know how they would get in the door, because the local newspapers have gone against the wall again due to the rise of the internet. So how they can possibly get in the door, it's not really sure. But certainly, another thing that has changed in that time is that when I came in, one of the things that I was rewarded for, and one of the things that was praised and encouraged in me, was to go off and to do some deep research to come to conclusions that maybe a lot of people would find controversial. You know, if you were willing to be controversial and you were willing to challenge the consensus, after doing the work, might I add, you couldn't just be controversial for the sake of it. Nobody ever awarded that. But if you're willing to do that, you would be promoted in your work, you would be rewarded in your work. And I remember Angus Fanning was one of the first people that I worked for, who was the Sunday Independent editor. He's the late and brilliant Angus Fanning. And I remember him saying to me, always tell the truth, be honest, and be as controversial as you like to be in that space, and we will support you in doing that. Now I think that it's the absolute opposite. I think that what is prized now in a very, very safe media is what I would kind of term a sort of middle-class mediocrity. So if you can hit that middle-class mediocrity, so if you can write all day long about being, you know, the trials of being a yummy mummy and what happens in the playground and creche fees and all these kind of things, you'll be promoted and given work as much as you can. But actually, if you write anything of controversy, you'll first of all not be encouraged to do that, because they don't want to get in any trouble with anyone, and they don't want the paper dragged all over social media. I mean, a brilliant speaker called Barry Weiss, who's a former New York Times writer, she's explained it as that Twitter is the ultimate editor now for an awful lot of newspapers. And so this is what's happening. The young journalists are kind of being scared off it instead of being encouraged into it. And you know, I remember one of the first things that I ever wrote. I was very lucky. One of the few journalists left in Irish media with a brilliant voice and things like this is Jean Kerrigan. And I remember when Jean Kerrigan was off one week, I was asked to stand in and take over his soapbox. And I was, I think, 24 or 25 years of age. I thought this was the greatest thing that had ever happened to me in my life, to be able to stand in for Jean Kerrigan. And I wrote a piece about contraception, which at the time actually it seemed to me to be a perfectly normal thing to say. And I'm wondering, what do the women in the audience agree with me now when I say what I said here back in something like 1998 or 2000? I was saying that contraception actually, far from being this wonderful invention that was freeing all women from you know, being the biggest, greatest revolution of feminism, in fact, what we were doing was we were offering to put fake hormones into our bodies in order to trick our bodies into doing something that it wasn't naturally supposed to do. So I just wrote this thinking, well, this is perfectly evident, you know, really should we be doing this, and how feminist is this to actually do this? But it resulted in, I remember, bags, when I think of the difference in journalism now, it resulted in bags and bags of letters into the newspaper. And I remember seeing them go by at my desk, and I remember thinking, oh God, not another black sack of newspapers over the contraception column. Because it was my first chance to get a voice, and then I thought, I'm going to be fired, I'm going to be sacked, this is all over, my career is dead. And not at all. Angus came up to me and he said, this is great, did you see all the reaction we're getting? You know, and I was saying, but like, surely half of them are awful. And he was saying, oh, half of them hate you and the other half think you're right. But he said, the whole point of journalism and media is debate, and it's to provoke a reaction, and it's to get people talking. And his viewpoint, which is shared, I believe, by you know, those people who've studied these kind of things, is that actually that is the basis of information gathering. That information in itself isn't the beginning and end point of knowledge. It's debate is what creates the information, what makes us passionate, what makes us want to find out more. And so he was thinking that we are stoking up the nation here. We're getting people talking, and that's actually what we're supposed to do. And you know, like for me, what I'm finding is in the universities, the university graduates who are coming out, that has been beaten out of them inside in the universities, which is an awful thing, because we see over the last while that free speech is actually being tamped down upon. Critical thinking isn't being held up, and common sense itself is actually suffering in general in the universities. It's not just me actually who is thinking this. There's sociological findings in a study, which is the biggest study I think done of it in media, about a recent study done on graduates in journalism, and they found that more than 1/3 did not demonstrate any significant improvement in 4 years of college. The sociologists concluded that journalism had changed to the point that yesterday's ragtag muckrakers have now become insiders themselves, and that newspapers are a homogenous group, liberal in outlook, and elite in economic status, public perception, and social influence. And that we now we need to get our more heterogeneous newsrooms in order to break the groupthink that has taken hold in newspapers, and that you readers are seeing reflected in your newspapers, and possibly reflected in yourself not being seen there. I decided that I would go through a couple of different issues that have come up in the last number of years, political issues that have sort of demonstrated how this has happened. So I'm going to just talk through things like the abortion referendum, which was a key one where this came up. I'll talk about the Me Too movement, and I'm going to talk about the housing crisis. So there are three things I think that have shown how democracy we're failing on a democratic level in newspapers in relation to those three topics. So the first one that I picked there was the abortion referendum. So this is only 2018, actually. It feels like an awful long time ago. But certainly me in media, I felt the type of, I've never had such hatred, actually, towards me for my views on abortion as any kind of anything else that I can ever remember. You couldn't actually talk about abortion in the media. There wasn't. There was only one view allowed. Again, I'm presuming that this is probably something noticed by the crowd here as well. Was that a lot of us were uncomfortable with it, to say the least, because abortion. The unfortunate truth of it is that it involves death. And we talk an awful lot about how it involves life, but actually what it involves is death. So what I felt from that viewpoint was that, we had to talk about it, we had to discuss it, we had to understand as well that while a lot of people were willing to maybe see that the law should have been changed, that they also didn't like that they had to do that. But what I found happening in the media, and that was completely accepted in the media at the time, was that not only could you tell the reader what they should think on this, you could also lecture them from a high about how awful it was if they disagreed with you. And so, you have this kind of elite media clerisy, not just not reflecting people's voices, but actually scolding people, labelling them for not agreeing with them. So in the midst of all this, probably back to my Sunday Independent times, where I was always encouraged to say what I thought and take the consequences. My viewpoint on abortion was to the point that we've kind of come out the other side of the need for it. We're in an era whereby we have contraception that is 99.9% effective. And so my thinking was, have we moved past the need for this? Would we not be better off instead introducing free contraception for women instead of offering them a free abortion? So, I was making the point that actually this can be more harmful for women than can be helpful in some cases. And, I kept trying to think of all the things that you were labelled for this. You were a knuckle dragger was one of them, a Bible basher, and because that's obviously a bad thing as well in modern media. And you were, either ignorant, backwards, you hate women, you're a misogynist, and this wasn't just certain sections of the media. This was kind of the agreed take on anyone who saw outside of that. But the one viewpoint they didn't think about was the the indicator that marks there's the greatest marker of life experience, which is class markers. So they didn't actually take into account the fact that a lot of people who are from a different class, or maybe a different, maybe a working class culture, or even even less than that, maybe a benefits class culture, they didn't take into account that maybe a lot of those people don't see pregnancy as such a terrible thing that needs to be sort of brushed away and sorted out and thrown under the carpet. Again, maybe I was uniquely positioned to write about that because I'm a single parent myself, so I kind of realize that sometimes it's not necessarily always the best thing, but the general consensus seemed to be that anyone who voted for abortion was backwards and a misogynist. And I don't know where we've come in Ireland to the point that we can say that about people, especially in our media, that's supposed to reflect. It's supposed to be the media itself is supposed to be representative of the people that it writes for. In the meantime, again, they abandoned the working classes in another way. They completely allowed the issue of free contraception, which was promised in the abortion referendum in 2018. They let that slide. So yes, we do now indeed have a terribly progressive country that funds free abortions, but not the means to prevent them. That hasn't come up as a major issue for any of the feminist writers that consider themselves the most modern and feminist writers in the country. They have left that entirely open. The other one then that I felt like that this whole scenario of sort of the forgetting of the culture of the working class, or the daily struggles of the working class. For me, the big one is the housing crisis. Now, I know we're probably most of the audience, I think, here are from the Northwest. So I'm not sure if the impact is the same here as it is in and around the Dublin area. But certainly this is something that has been a problem since 2014, and a very, very serious problem. I live in the inner city, as I was saying there. I'm surrounded by people who are affected by this. But yet, when I was trying to raise this issue in the media in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, all of the times when the government wasn't acting, they just completely ignored it until 2020, when it finally kind of sprung into action. And then 2021, when there was a situation in Maynooth where houses that would be bought by the middle class were taken by a vulture fund, suddenly it emerged. And I suppose my point is that until it came into a higher class, there was no interest in the media. In fact, there was a denial in the media of it, and that now is why we're in the situation we're in today. One of the last ones I'd like to make a point about is the Me Too movement. I think Dr. Casey, actually, who spoke earlier, has written about this as well. For me, I felt that it was at its very basic basis, us in the media, we should have stood up against this, but nobody, well, again, probably I happen to be probably the only one, was willing to say that this was actually a breach of the presumption of innocence, and that when that is taken away from people, it's usually minority groups who suffer the most. And it was only then, unfortunately, when we had a lot of cases where people were accused in the wrong, that people finally came out, and then finally, when it was too late, decided to stand up against this, or to retrospectively say that it may not have been the greatest idea. So I don't think I have a whole lot more time left, which you're probably glad about, because I'm a terribly nervous speaker, but hopefully things kind of improved a bit as we went on. But the couple of solutions to this, because I always believe, in trying to look for solutions to these things, and I think maybe the solutions for me are very simple. Let's quit this situation in Ireland whereby you need to go to university and get a degree in order to get in and get your experience that you need to be a journalist, because we need those working class voices, and we need those cultural differences in working newsrooms. So stop going to university and get off Twitter. And the second thing would be to get out into the real world, because when you're out among the people, you're aware of the issues that affect the people, instead of all being in your own social bubble writing for each other. And so I think also, as well, as journalists, we need to fight back against this, to defeat self-censorship, to stop telling ourselves that, you know, that we need to behave in certain ways or not speak certain things. We have a duty as journalists to actually say the things that need to be said, and to fight for things that are not always popular. But just finally, I think that the last thing I just wanted to say was about Joseph Pulitzer. We think we should all go back to the values of Joseph Pulitzer, who is always mentioned by the great and the good as the best journalist that ever existed. But it's probably not known that he started newspapers for the people who couldn't afford them. You know, he was homeless himself, and he was out of work himself. He started the penny press because previous to that, newspapers were pay only, as they are now, like the Irish Times. You get a subscription, and they would have cost people a month's wages, and he made them accessible to the people, and that is his legacy, and that lasted for a very long time, up until we came to the situation where we are now. But I think we should all remember as journalists that when we are writing for our readers, that we owe them to write the truth of what's out there and to find out what's happening. And as he said, I want to talk to a nation and not to a select committee. Okay, so thank you, thanks.